We'll call this meeting of Privileges and Elections Subcommittee number 2 to order. Please, members, please answer the roll. Clerk will close the roll. We have a quorum present. We will go straight into bills. The first one on the list, House Bill 1551, Delegate Helmer. Come on up.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members of the subcommittee. As all of you know, on January 6, 2020, insurrectionists attacked the Capitol, many of them fueled by right-wing conspiracy theories that made them think it was okay to try to overturn an election. All that House Bill 1551 does is assure that dark money has light shed on it and that we don't bring that kind of electioneering and conspiracy theory mongering here to Virginia. It allows for free speech. It allows everybody to say what they'd like to say within the confines of our law, but it does ensure that the source of money is disclosed in light with everything else we do with elections and campaigns. Mr. Chair, I hope it's the pleasure of the subcommittee to report this bill forward, and happy to take any questions.
All right. Any committee members have a question of Delegate Helmer right now? All right. Anyone in the room wish to speak in favor of the bill?
Mr. Chairman, we have one question on this.
Delegate Bloxham.
A bill similar to this last year, is there a considerable amount different, or is this the same?
Mr. Chair, for all intents and purposes of the same bill, I think there's a couple of minor just...
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right. Anyone here in the room wish to speak in favor of the bill? Anyone here in opposition? I think we do have 4 individuals online who would like to speak, and I'll go on the list in the order in which I have you. Nancy Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Nancy Morgan, member of Big Money Out, a nonpartisan group advocating for campaign finance reform. We support this bill that was crafted on drawing many of the provisions of the 2021 bicameral bipartisan meetings of the Subcommittee on Campaign Finance. It also draws on national best practices, which similar to legislation adopted and passed in Arizona, Alaska, and Rhode Island. Just to remind you, after Citizens United was passed in 2010, the justices on the Supreme Court voted 8-1 in favor of full disclosure. It's remarkable that Justice Scalia was quoted that requiring people to stand up in public for their public acts fosters a civic courage without which democracy is doomed. You might hear from dark money groups today that their speech needs to be private. They quote the 1958 NAACP Alabama case. However, this is 2021. So thanks for Dan Helmer for introducing this bill. We think that it protects legislators when they're running for office, and among voters, it builds confidence in government. It's a win-win for voters and legislations, and we hope that you pass this bill. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next on my list is Jessica Mott.
Hi, my name is Jessica Mott from Arlington, Virginia. I'm a member of the executive committee of the grassroots group We of Action, and I support this bill. I know that in common with other voters, I don't like being poorly informed or manipulated. The Sunshine Bill will increase, or as I call it at least, will increase voter access to information on advertisements funded by independent expenditure by requiring disclosure of key funders within the advertisements themselves. This greater disclosure should help discourage the influence of dark money in Virginia's elections. I urge you to support this bill.
Thank you. Bill Millhauser. Mr. Millhauser, you are muted if you were trying to speak. All right, we will move on to...
I'm here now.
All right, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity of speaking this morning. My name is Bill Millhauser. I'm from Fairfax County, Virginia. I support HB 1551, which requires independent expenditure ads that are not made in coordination with any or supporting any issue or candidate disclose the top 3 individual donors. I support this bill because I and many Virginians don't know who's really funding such independent expenditures. Yet 90% of all Virginians say they want full disclosure of donors paying to influence state elections. And I would just repeat the quote from Ms. Morgan from Justice Scalia: requiring people to stand up in public for their political acts fosters civic courage, without which democracy is doomed. I think it's very important we heed that statement. I urge you to support this bill.
Thank you. Thank you. And last on our list, Pamela Berg.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. The League of Women Voters of Virginia supports HB 1551. This bill would be an important first step in Virginia's efforts to enhance the transparency of campaign funding. We support requiring information about the sponsors of political ads and their top donors be revealed. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions of Delegate Helmer? Delegate, you have the last word.
Mr. Chair, members.
I think you have someone behind you. Sure, come on up.
Thank you. I'm really sorry about being late, but thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak. I'm Lindsay Zaya. I'm with the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, and although we see the good intentions of this bill and the delegate, we're very concerned because this bill could open the door to doxing and really providing an opportunity for a lot of donors to be exposed and have their names on public documents, like even social media ads, from my understanding, and just ads all over the public that could potentially hurt people who are trying to donate to a good cause but just are fearful that their information could be out there. And from my understanding as well, a lot of these disclosures would already be available on independent expenditure reports. And so for the transparency aspect, it should already be in place. And this would just be taking a step further that we believe would be potentially harmful. Yeah, for these purposes, we oppose this bill. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Delegate Waxman, you have a question of the patron?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I do. When he started the presentation, there was some discussion about preventing January 6th from happening in Virginia, and I'm having a hard time figuring how that is relevant to the electioneering bill.
Mr. Chair, I'd answer the delegate that protecting our freedoms includes ensuring we have transparency in who is funding communications directed at causing people to take action, including those related to elections. If we look at what happened in January 6th, many of the people who are involved in encouraging folks involved in illegal activity to besiege our Capitol and undermine our elections and undermine our freedom and the freedom to vote, we're doing so under the cover of the ability to not disclose. We want to ensure we protect our democracy here in Virginia. I think we have an excellent opportunity to do this, and what this does is simply ensures that in a certain category of expenditures, independent expenditures that aren't coordinated with campaign, we are asking folks to do exactly what we ask them to do when they're operating in conjunction with a campaign. So I think this is a pro-democracy bill, it is a pro-voting bill, and if you believe in elections and democracy, I hope it's one that you'll support.
Delegate Maldonado.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Speaking to the bill, and I'd like to make a motion at the appropriate time. I'd like to speak to the bill and say that how much I appreciate the delegate bringing this bill forward. Last campaign cycle, last year, the things that we heard across party lines was a call and a cry for more transparency. The transparency was with respect to funding. The transparency was with respect to communications. The transparency was with respect to what happened with the funding. So I thank the delegate for the good time and work put into this. And at the appropriate time, I'd like to make a motion.
Do you have anything you'd like to add?
Mr. Chair, I appreciate the time of the subcommittee today.
All right. Committee operates by motion.
Move to report.
Substitute motion.
Delegate Williams.
Move to lay the bill on the table.
Been a motion made, properly seconded to lay House Bill 1551 on the table. Members wishing to vote, vote on the voting board. Clerk will close the roll. House Bill 1551 laid on the table by a vote of 5-3.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the subcommittee.
Thank you, Delegate Helmer. So I did not run this by the patrons ahead of time, so they may not be amenable. But I know that we have Delegate Simon and Delegate Cherry who have maybe not quite identical bills, but they're pretty close. Would you guys want to, you can go in whichever order you prefer. We can take testimony on the concept. People can speak to one or the other if they prefer. And then we can kind of figure out which vehicle, if any of those, that we want to try to use. It's however you all prefer. Again, I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
No. We've talked about this, and he's a co-patron of my bill, so we're happy to
Okay.
do it this way, sir. Go ahead.
All right, so we are going to, I guess, numerically, we will pull up House Bill 1552 right now. And so then when we take testimony, people can speak on 1552 and 1826, and then we can figure out where the subcommittee wants to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That makes perfect sense to me, and I
Okay.
appreciate the opportunity.
Sure.
And Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I've been working on this issue. I think it's my 10th session, probably the 8th or 9th time. And one of the things I've learned over my years here is if you want to have any chance of success at doing something like this, that has to do with campaign finance or campaign ethics, it's got to be both bipartisan and bicameral. And I want to thank Delegate Cherry for helping pick up the baton on this issue to try and carry it forward if it's to go there, and working also with the senators on the other side. Because again, if it's going to work, it's got to be something that's not a gotcha. It's not one political party trying to get anything over on the other. And Mr. Chairman, I'm going to take just a couple minutes. I know we got a busy docket, but I feel like last year I maybe took some things for granted and didn't do enough discussion here, and we didn't have a whole lot of feedback, so I wasn't sure what exactly didn't like. So just a couple things that I want to highlight, and then I'll turn it over to Delegate Cherry. First, one of the big concerns over the years about this is how will we, is this line on what constitutes personal use going to be so fuzzy that people step over it without knowing it, without even seeing that it's there? And to try and address that issue, I think both bills have a process where the Board of Elections is going to be required to publish guidance in consultation with the Attorney General's office and publish examples of what constitutes personal use and what doesn't, and give you some real good illustrations. And the federal government already does this. The Federal Elections Commission, which has a ban on personal use, has a really comprehensive list. So almost any scenario you can think of, you search for it on their site, and they're going to give you a yes or a no, or a here's how to make it compliant if it's not. So we want to make sure that that's there and available for everybody before this bill becomes effective. Because again, we're not about setting a trap for the unwary. This isn't about setting up traps or giving political opponents opportunities to play games, which is one of the other big concerns that we've heard about this. And you have this ban, somebody's going to comb through your report, they're going to see a expenditure that looks, or it's hard to explain, and immediately go to filing a complaint. This is personal use, and this person's unethical, and they're violating it, and file a complaint, and then just put out a piece of mail that says, hey, they're under investigation, right, for a complaint. And wouldn't that be awful if that happened? And so the protection against that, there's a bunch of stuff that's built into the bill that stops that from happening. So the state board, so first of all, to issue a complaint, you've got to be a constituent or a donor, right? So it's not just anybody from anywhere that can file the complaint. So you have to have sort of a vested interest in the race. And then you've got to submit 3 pieces of evidence, and a sworn statement about why it is you think it is. You got to submit that to the state board, and the state board is going to review that. And if the complaint doesn't meet the standards, it doesn't include all the required information, and doesn't rise to the level of unauthorized use, it's going to be dismissed summarily, right? There'll be no investigation. There'll be no accusation. There's no need to go be dragged before a board to defend yourself. So frivolous complaints are going to be dealt with that way, and we've tried to work it out so that we can weed those out and not create opportunities for people to play games with the statute. So those are the big differences, again, between what we've seen in years past and what this does. This is I mean, 48, I think, or 49 other states have already figured out a way to prohibit the personal use of campaign funds on what we're trying to do. I think none of us think it's okay, hopefully, to take money right out of our campaign till and use it for ourselves and spend it on ourselves. It's supposed to be used to advance your campaign, to help get you elected, or to help get other people elected. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will turn it over to Delegate Cherry for the rest of the presentation.
He obviously hit on the biggest parts of the bill, and I do think it's important that we send this message to the people that are donating to our campaigns, that we take it very seriously, that the money is for our campaigns and not for ourselves. There's probably some egregious examples out there if we all comb through everybody's, and as the delegate said, there's a safety mechanism built in, because the worst case scenario for us is we allow someone to weaponize this where they can go out and say, make frivolous complaints and then go, oh, they're under investigation. And we've tried very diligently to make sure that's not what this bill does, but it simply gives a transparency to people to know that their money is going to campaigns and not into someone's pocket. Thank you.
All right, are there any questions from committee members?
Mr. Chair,
Delegate Williams.
or either patron, do you guys have any concrete examples of people using personal campaign finance or funds for personal expenditures?
So I didn't come with a list to point fingers and so forth. The part of the reason it's hard to do that is it's difficult to tell without any kind of mechanism or any kind of prohibition what constitutes personal use. So what you have, you will have reports that, and the press has latched onto these, that will have numerous examples of people using their campaign credit card to eat at restaurants. Now, what's happening at those restaurants, we don't know. There's no reason to inquire because it could be entertaining donors, it could be donor development, it could be a bunch of things. We have people using their campaign funds to fill their car up with gas. There's no need to account for that because you could be using it just to drive yourself back and forth to work, or it could be a legitimate campaign. Like, look, I'm knocking doors, I got a big district, it's a lot of ground to cover, I wouldn't be using this gas but for my campaign. So there have been, again, a number of investigations over the years and suspicions raised, but nobody's, I can't tell you that this happened on this day with this particular politician.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Bloxham.
So, but every expenditure is seen right now, the way it is. I mean, you can see everything that comes in and everything that goes out. It's all transparent.
Well, you can, but Mr. Chairman, I would say to the delegate, right now we don't have any kind of audit function, or we don't have any kind of real, so you have to enter an entry. How much information that entry actually provides will answer your question about whether we have transparency or not. For instance, you could put $50 Amazon, right? Because you put $50 on your credit card and it was paid to Amazon, and that's all the information. That satisfies our reporting requirements in Virginia, but it doesn't give you any insight on what item that was actually spent for. That's a slightly different problem, and I have another bill, not this year, but that's another recommendation of the Joint Commission. Because the answer is, and I hear where you're going with this, which is we can already hold people accountable because we'll just look at their reports. And if they're spending money on personal items, we'll just flash their report. We'll let the voters decide whether that's an appropriate use or not. The problem with that, again, is that it's difficult to tell. So what this does is it sets up a process to investigate only founded complaints. And you're going to have to provide some evidence, not just beyond just, I saw it and I don't know what it is, right? So you'd have to provide some evidence that says, I see this, and because of other things that I know, or because of some other evidence that I have, I believe there's a preponderance of the evidence. More likely than not, that this expenditure was actually used for personal use and not to advance any campaign-related reason. And then the state board has a chance to look at it, and then we can shine some light on what these folks are doing. But the report itself, and again, I understand, in theory, we have full transparency, but until we have some more detailed reporting requirements, it doesn't give us the opportunity to look at those and say, hey, this is something or it isn't. That's my concern with the pure transparency approach.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'd like to add that right now, no, you're good. That there's no mechanism for who to go to. There is no one that's responsible for this. And this has become an issue recently, and I'm going to have another bill next year because there was reports that showed a senator took campaign donations during session last year. And there was no mechanism for who do we report that to, who's responsible, who oversees that. And so it's very murky. This clearly defines who's responsible, who does what, when they do it, and making sure that there's someone responsible that you can go to say, is it or is it not?
Delegate Williams.
So do you have evidence that this is happening, or do you not have evidence? Because it feels like I'm hearing both.
So to the very specific question of had I brought any evidence here to present to the committee, the answer is no, I haven't. Is there evidence that exists that it's happening? I believe it does happen. Whether it's intentional or not, right, is part of the problem. So again, one of the other big aspects of this bill is that it requires the Board of Elections to provide this list of examples, right? And so again, as I started out with, this is not a gotcha bill. This isn't to try and accuse anybody of anything necessarily, but to provide some real clear guidance about where the lines are and what's proper and what's improper. So if nothing else, this bill would at least tell people, I'll give you an example from years past, right? What if I spill a cup of coffee on my shirt while I'm out on the campaign trail? Can I go use campaign funds to buy a new shirt or not, right? That would be the kind of example, if you didn't know, you could go look it up on the website. It'd be published as whether dry cleaning expenses and other things are proper or not. And if it's not on the list, it gives you a mechanism to ask the state board, hey, can I do this, or is this an improper use of my campaign fund? So building in that kind of guidance for people to eliminate the gray areas is a big piece of what this does.
Mr. Chair, follow.
Delegate Williams.
So it seems like you're building another framework to make sure that there's no abuse of personal finance, just like things that we know are happening at the polls and we want to protect against. Is that fair to say?
Mr. Chairman, I would say that what we know is happening at the polls is certainly a subjective matter, but I think that, again, we do have a process in place because the things that have been suggested are happening at the polls are in fact crimes, right? And we do have ways to investigate those. So if somebody's trying to vote twice or somebody's trying to impersonate another voter, that's illegal, right? And so you can go investigate, you can have a Commonwealth's attorney look at it, you can have other people look at it. And so to have a similar process, if you suspect that people are misusing their campaign funds, I think would be appropriate.
Delegate Munden King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Speaking to the bill and then a question.
Do we have evidence? Go ahead.
So actually, I've been around for quite some time, and so most of the most egregious abuses of campaign funds happened before the advent of this great website called VPAP, because the state website was, a little less easy to navigate for the everyday person. So people didn't really have a lot of transparency into what was happening. And then with the advent of VPAP, legislators started to be more conscientious of these types of spending. But prior to, there were car payments, mortgage payments, dinners, all types of things by legislators, but not to age myself. That was quite a few years ago. So thank you all for bringing this bill. After 2014 and the situation with the former governor, this body did quite a bit to rein in some of the wild, wild west of campaign finance that Virginia was. And so I think this is a critical next step for our voters and for our community to have trust in what it is we're doing. So thank you all for bringing this forward. And I mean, a bipartisan issue, if we could all find a way to work together, we would be so much better off. And I apologize because I didn't have a chance to review, but wanted to see if this follows the federal guidelines related to childcare.
Yeah, but Mr. Chair, it does. Specifically, explicitly calls out child care expenses as a result of your campaign. So it would follow the federal rule on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, is there anyone in the room who wishes to speak in favor of the bill? Is there anyone here in opposition? All right, we'll go online. I think we're in the same order that we were in before. Nancy Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm coordinator of Big Money Out. We support this bill, which has been presented since 2014. So we really think it's time. It was just passed 15-0 bipartisan in the Senate P&E committee. And we're unique in the nation in that our legislators can take unlimited donation and spend the money on themselves. A vacation. You asked about examples. I mean, when you go to the press, you can find examples. You can find a legislator that takes his money and puts it into an LLC. You can find examples of legislators organizing dinners for lobbyists. But the fact is, when you go on the Board of Elections or even VPAP, there's no record of that. And we've gone through it. You get all these entry points of somebody spending $10,000 on campaign, hiring people for the campaign, but there's no documentation on what they spent it out. So this was discussed as in the bipartisan bicameral meeting of subcommittee exhaustively. It addresses frivolous complaints. We really think this moves Virginia forward, and it helps build confidence in voters, in our legislators. We really hope that you finally pass this bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jessica Mott.
Jessica Mott, We of Action. As a donor, it's important for me to have confidence that my donations are being used for the intended purpose, the campaign expenditures. Virginia ranks very poorly on campaign finance laws compared to other states, especially regarding restrictions on personal use. And according to 2021 opinion poll, 73% of Virginians support restricting personal use of campaign funds. Passage of this bill is long overdue and should be low-hanging fruit. I urge you all to support this bill.
Thank you. Bill Millhauser.
The chairman and members of the committee. My name is Bill Millhauser from Fairfax County. I support these two bills, which would restrict the personal use of campaign funds. I think it's really, really important that all Virginians understand that their politicians do not misuse campaign funds. I do not agree with the argument that we should continue what I think is an honor system. I think we need clear rules and procedures written in law to regulate the use of private use of campaign funds. As Ms. Morgan pointed out, bill has been bandied about for about 6 years. It's time to move forward. Virginians need to see that politicians have a clear set of guardrails to regulate the use of campaign funds. Thank you again for your time.
And Pamela Berg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. The League of Women Voters of Virginia supports HB 1552 and 1826. This bill addresses the League's long-held belief that the personal use of campaign funds should be disallowed. We also support the bill's inclusion of a detailed list of acceptable uses of campaign funds, which the code currently lacks. We are pleased that this bill acknowledges child care expenses as exempt from the personal use ban. We hope that you additionally will consider expanding this exemption from personal use to include all dependent care expenses, as West Virginia and Vermont have recently done. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I think that's everyone on our list. Final word.
Mr. Chairman, as far as what you guys are going to do with the bills, I've already signed on as a chief co-patron to Delegate Cherry's bill. So understanding the politics around here, if we need to have it bicameral and bipartisan, if mine needs to lay on the table to get his forward, then I would be okay with that. If it's a matter of killing both of them, I would have a different opinion. So for what it's worth.
I understand. All right. You've heard the bill and testimony, and the subcommittee operates by motion.
Mr. Chair.
Delegate Williams.
It's my understanding the bills are already in block. Is that right?
They are not, but I
would
think
like to
we
move them to be.
So I think we heard them in block. Technically, you can move them in block one way or the other, or we can move them separately one way or the other.
Well, Mr. Chair, I would like to move them in a block and make a motion for that block later.
Okay, so we'll put House Bill 1552 and 1826 in a block.
Mr. Chairman,
Delegate Sickles.
move to report the bills in a block.
Mr. Chair, substitute motion.
Delegate Williams.
Mr. Chair, I would suggest that donors need to not donate to the people they don't trust. And I'd also suggest they don't vote for them, and therefore I'd move to lay this on the table.
Been a motion made properly seconded to recommend laying House Bill 1552 and 1826 on the table. Members wishing to vote on the voting board. Clerk will close the roll. Those two bills are laid on the table by a vote of 5-3.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I know it's an early day and a long day for you guys, so thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you both. All right, House Bill 1648, Delegate Anderson, come on up.
Hey, good morning. Simple bill. Foreign corporations shouldn't be donating to Virginia politicians. It just restricts and prohibits foreign influence corporations from making political contributions to all of us. I yield for any questions.
All right, are there any questions to the delegate?
Mr. Chair.
Delegate Williams?
This one is tough for me because I don't know exactly how we can determine all the time foreign influence corporations. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Sure. So, Delegate Williams, we tried to define at line 20 what a foreign influence corporation is, and it defines three different types of entities. Somebody that owns or holds a beneficial. Well, I don't need to read it to you, but it's defined right there in the three categories. But essentially, if it's a corporation that is not a U.S. corporation, or an owner has at least 1% controlling interest in that corporation, they can't make contributions to Virginia donors. And then there's for corporations that are making contributions to Virginia candidates, they have to certify that they're not foreign corporations within 7 days. And I think that's where we get the compliance from the corporations. Look, we have all kinds of bills before the General Assembly this year. We don't want China buying our land. And it's the same philosophy. We shouldn't have foreign corporations meddling in Virginia elections. It's no different than them buying our land.
Delegate Maldonado? Okay. Delegate Taylor?
Was this brought forth by any incident or urgent concern, something recent?
No, I mean, I'm. There's no anybody who knows me knows that I have a lot of heartburn with Citizens United to begin with. Corporations having free speech is kind of a weird thing for me to begin with. But if we're going to let corporations have free speech, fine. But we don't need to give that same right to a Chinese corporation or a corporation that may be in a country that's hostile to the United States. I don't know about you, but when we in the congressional elections, I got so much mail in my mailbox from fake entities. Who knows where those things are coming from? If they're all Americans kicking into it, that's one thing. But if it's Iran or China or Korea, North Korea, I wouldn't want that. And I would hope none of you would either. And this would just stop that from happening.
Delegate Bloxham?
In the bill, it doesn't really say that if the foreign business has a business presence in Virginia. So this would limit corporations that have a business presence in Virginia from donating?
It would limit any corporation anywhere from donating to Virginia candidates, whether they're in Virginia or not. It wouldn't prohibit Rite Aid or CVS from donating to a candidate, but it would prohibit a foreign-owned corporation anywhere in the world from donating to political candidates.
Delegate Anderson, so question on that though. So you have some of the entities that you mentioned are public companies, and so let's say today that their institutional ownership is all American investors, and then next week some foreign entity buys 2% of CVS, then what posture does that put CVS in?
I think that would fall under under 1 or 2, lines 22 or 25. So 2 or more foreign owners in aggregate hold more control or indirect beneficial ownership of 5% or more of the total equity, that would consider them a foreign corporation. So if CVS was purchased by 5% of the shares of CVS were purchased by a Chinese investor, then yeah, they would be disqualified. This is happening in this bill models other states. To Delegate Taylor's question, Minnesota has, and I have an expert witness that'll give you some more background about that, and maybe we should let them answer your question better than me.
Yeah, and what I was getting at, I thought that was correct with what your bill actually does, and then I guess then my next scenario would be that owner sells out, sells their shares, takes their profits, and moves on, and all of a sudden CVS no longer, I'm just using that example because you used it, no longer has any foreign ownership to speak of.
Yeah, and that's why there's
you
a
could be a lot of
purge.
back and forth here.
Yeah, well, that's why there's a purge in 47, where after the corporation makes a donation, they just have to certify they're not a foreign-owned corporation. So if it was flip-flopping like that, it doesn't disqualify CVS forever. It would, and keep not picking on CVS, it wouldn't disqualify the company forever.
Yeah.
It would just allow them to certify that at the moment they made the contribution, they didn't have more than 5% ownership by
Okay,
foreign
sure.
investors.
All right. Delegate Waxman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've had a question for a patron, maybe a little bit more of a real-life scenario. With redistricting, of course, we're running in districts that are new to us in some parts, and we may not know everything about those businesses. One of the sections that's new to me with the redistricting is Isle of Wight, where they've got a huge employer, Smithfield Foods. They were recently purchased by the Chinese group. Is it upon the candidates' campaign to do research on every business in that district to determine whether or not they are foreign-owned or not? That could take quite some time.
Yeah, Delegate Waxman, I was mindful of that, which is why line 47 to 52 really protects the candidate. Because if Smithfield Foods were to donate to your campaign within 7 days, they have to certify with the Department of Elections that they're not a foreign-owned corporation. So within that window, they're going to certify. And if they certify that they are, or if they're not a corporation, you're fine. And if they are, you would have to give the money back in that scenario. But it would happen within a week of that donation being made. You would have to do nothing other than follow up with the Department of Elections to see what the certification was.
Delegate Williams.
And if they're lying, that wouldn't fall on the candidate.
Yes, question for the patron and Delegate Anderson. Sometimes these corporations will donate to an association, and then we might get a donation from an association. And I know that it does say political PAC or political action committee. Do associations usually donate from a PAC or from an association?
Yeah, it would prohibit the at line 40. It would prohibit the independent expenditure or campaign contribution to any candidate, campaign committee, political committee, or political party committee. So I think it goes across the board. So yeah, so if a foreign corporation were to donate to Emily's List, they would have to make that same certification. And if they're a foreign-owned corporation, Emily's List would have to turn it back over, for instance. I mean, Planned Parenthood or anything. Yeah. So, but again, it all goes on the corporation. Now, if the corporation says they're not foreign and they are, there's criminal penalties for that that are contained in 42 to 46. So it doesn't put any burden on the candidates. It just puts it all on the corporations that are donating to certify that they're not foreign-owned. I think it's a good bill.
Delegate Maldonado.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sort of speaking to the bill and a question. You're referencing here, you keep saying foreign corporation, but what we're talking about is foreign influenced corporation. And I'm curious, and I think those are two different things, but I'm also curious how you came about 1%, because when you structure businesses, there are ownership rights that go to management and ownership rights that just simply go to equity and have no control over the decision making in the organization. And 1% is very low. It's a very, very low bar that seems onerous, tied to a CEO having to certify each time that it's not foreign influenced, not foreign corporation, but foreign influence. So I'm just curious, how did you come about the 1%, and why is that the lever that you think is where influence occurs? And how does that CEO certification sort of work in your mind?
So if you have 1% of Amazon, you're a rich person. I mean, you're very wealthy. If you have 1% of any of these major corporations, you are a multi-millionaire. I mean, we're not talking about 1% of a law firm that's worth $1 million. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars corporations that are participating. So I mean, if it's a small company, they're going to know who their owners are. And if it's a big company and you have somebody that has a 1% interest in a company like Amazon or Smithfield Foods or any of them, they're known. I mean, these are not strangers to these corporations. So I think 1% is a good threshold. If you want to raise it, I'm not completely objectionable to that, but these are mega wealthy people that if you have a 1% interest in a corporation, a big corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Sickles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got 3 comments, I think, if you'll indulge me. One is that our Department of Elections doesn't even have people to audit our campaign accounts now. To add this to their workload would be such an incredible increase in the staff. This bill, should it pass, needs to go to appropriations at a minimum. Number 2, I work in the maritime area, and then if you want to participate in domestic transportation in the United States, you have to have a 75% owned company. I have a friend who makes thousands of dollars, 4 figures an hour, to try to figure out when any purchase is made whether that company qualifies or not to buy and operate that vessel in the United States. It's extraordinarily difficult in today's environment, and for the reasons you stated earlier about how do you figure out who owns something in this day and age. And third, China is the largest shipper through the Port of Hampton Roads. I mean, I don't know how many tons, while we're sitting here, tons of goods are being unloaded or being shipped to China in our own port, which is a state agency. So this is a very complicated area that, and this is I wish we could do this. I wish that this wasn't unconstitutional as well, because, you can't limit, under a current law, I don't agree with it, but current law, corporations are people. That's what the Supreme Court has said. And so this is just a populist measure that I hope is struck as we vote down. Thank you.
All right, Delegate Taylor.
I agree with the intent and the your intention to protect us from foreign influence, but I'd like to make a motion at the appropriate time.
All right. I think we've asked a lot of questions of Delegate Anderson, but do we have anyone here in the room who wishes to speak in favor of this bill? Is there anyone in the room in opposition?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Chrissy Noonan with Reed Smith on behalf of the Chamber. We oppose the bill. This would be a significant and sweeping change in public policy. It is burdensome in its application and its requirements for compliance. And it's hard to imagine a Virginia business that would not be impacted by this legislation, by the legislation's intended scope, by the prohibitions, and the reporting requirements, which would require any corporation CEO, not just one that's foreign influenced, but any corporation, any CEO to affirm under penalty of perjury that they are not foreign influenced. And foreign influence does not mean foreign government owned. If you look at line 34 of the bill, foreign owner includes a foreign investor, which includes an individual who is not a citizen of the United States. So one single person who is not a citizen of the United States who owns a minimum or at least 1% of any corporation would designate that corporation as foreign influenced and would prohibit the corporation from being able to donate in the Commonwealth. And for these reasons, we respectfully request that you oppose the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have the same sign-up list online as well. So we'll start with Nancy Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's surprising for all of us that 40% of our stocks are owned by foreign companies or foreign entities, and all those stocks are going into our companies. And I don't think that anybody in this room can agree that it's okay to let foreign money coming through corporations used to influence our election. Just to be clear, the federal government has in place laws against foreign entities giving monies to candidates in the states as well. And the federal government bans, along with 22 states, corporate contributions. But as we know, as Senator Delegate Anderson mentioned Citizens United opened the floodgates to this money. Virginia, by passing this bill, would be joining many jurisdictions that already have this in place. And they manage it. It's not so complicated. Companies know who their stockholders are. They have to do is the CEO knows who owns the stock, who their shareholders are, and all they do is simply submit a statement saying it's not foreign influenced. And as to the 1%, this is a normal. When you look at other jurisdictions, including Minnesota, which is reviewing right now, New York has looked at it. California has these laws in place. This is being implemented, and it doesn't affect the candidates. It's not burdensome for the Department of Elections because basically they have to show the evidence themselves. So we really think this is an important issue in terms of accountability. It's manageable, and we hope that the delegates in this room don't think that it's too onerous because other jurisdictions are already doing it. So why shouldn't Virginia? So we really hope that you pass this bill. Thanks.
All right, Jessica Mott.
Hi, Jessica Mott, WOFA. Any appearance of legislators having conflict of interest due to contributions from foreign influence corporations is very troubling. This bill would prevent this appearance, and it sets clear standards and for defining what constitutes foreign influence and establishes accountability through reporting requirements and sanctions. It follows precedents set in 7 states, with 10 more states considering similar legislation. It would stem one particularly egregious form of dark money. I urge you to support this bill.
All right, Bill Millhauser.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'll keep my remarks very brief. I support the comments of the 2 previous speakers. I'm very concerned about the influence of foreign money, either through independent expenditures or through corporations in our election process. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. And Pamela Berg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. The League supports HB 1648. We believe Virginia's protections against foreign influence in our elections should be broadened as provided in this bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Are there any further questions of Delegate Anderson? Delegate, last word.
Mr. Chair, if I could ask.
Delegate Williams.
Mr. Anderson, Delegate Anderson, I'm sorry. Even if this bill doesn't go forward, would there be any other work group or study or policy committee or any of those things that could look at this that you know of or would suggest?
Yeah, sure. Send it to the study that didn't meet at all last past year.
Oh, they didn't meet at all? They didn't meet at all?
They didn't meet one time. We have a group here that didn't meet one time. So sure, send it there. And I'm sure it'll meet a great debate.
I didn't know that.
I'm not being sarcastic.
No, I didn't know that. I'm sorry to hear that.
All
right. Last word, Delegate Anderson.
Just to Delegate Sickles' point, 2 things. One, there's no fiscal impact. There'd be no burden on the Department of Elections would just be taking the forms and filing them. They're not auditing them. And that's it.
Okay.
There's no enforcement. There's no enforcement unless it's proven, if somehow it's proven to be untrue, and then it would go, like you said, to the Commonwealth Attorney's Office in an early.
Delegate Sickles. All right. You've heard the bill, and the committee operates by motion.
Mr. Chair, I would move to pass by indefinitely and be speaking to the motion.
Delegate Williams.
That's what I would do. I moved to pass by and definitely speak to the motion briefly.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the concerns, and I totally understand Delegate Anderson's motive on this. I'm concerned about it catching up too many people in its wake, just because of smaller businesses. They might not be Amazons or CVS's, but they still might have strategic partnerships in French. Canada, things like that. So that would be my concern, which is why I was asking about somebody looking further into it. And I'm sorry to hear that those people didn't meet. And I hope that I'm not actually on the committee that didn't meet, and I missed an email.
So your motion is to pass by the 1648 indefinitely? All right, been motion made, properly seconded, to pass by House Bill 1648 indefinitely. Members wishing to vote, vote on the voting board.
Have a good day.
Clerk will close the roll. House Bill 1648 passed by a vote of 8-0. House Bill 1862, Delegate Sullivan, come on up.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. By my count, I am the fifth delegate in front of you to tell you that his or her bill is really simple. But mine really is, despite its length. I'll explain that in just a moment. The bill, Mr. Chairman, is inspired by something called the Uniform Faithful Presidential Electors Act. And just a little bit of background, I'm sure most of you know this, there is a nationwide commission of, I'll call them eminent lawyers, called the National Conference of Uniform Law Commissioners. Virginia, each state sends a delegation. Virginia is well represented by a number of spectacular lawyers. Tom Edmonds, who used to run the Virginia Bar Association, Chris Nolan's with McGuire Woods, DLS's own amigo Wade is on the commission. And someone I think you all probably know, Lane Needler, who's sitting behind me here, has been walking these halls for, is it 50 years, Lane? Something like that? 45 years. So the commission gets together, and as its name implies, they develop proposed uniform laws in areas that the 50 states, in their view, sort of ought to be simpatico. The most famous one is the Uniform Commercial Code, so that commerce is treated the same way across state lines. There's the Uniform Probate Act, again, for wills, so that all states treat them the same way. The Foreign Deposition Act. So some time ago, and I want to tell you this frankly has very little to do with the 2020 election or anything else recent. In 2010, as a matter of fact, the commission created the Uniform Faithful Presidential Electors Act. And you might ask why. The issue of whether electors, and we all know that on election day when you're voting for president and vice president, you're actually voting for electors, Virginia's electors, to vote in the Electoral College. There have been examples, frankly, throughout our history. The ones that sort of are most famous in 1968, there were some electors who sort of openly talked about not voting the way they had been obligated to vote. In 1976, Senator Dole acknowledged that the party had looked at, had the election been closer, had looked at trying to peel off some electors. And it's sort of an open secret that parties at least talk about, well, what if it's a close election? Maybe we can get some electors to vote the other way. So as far back as 2010, this commission developed the Uniform Faithful Presidential Electors Act. I will tell you that our bill, frankly, isn't a word-for-word use of that act, because what we found as we started to read through how Virginia treats appointing or electing and organizing its electors is that Virginia, thankfully, already had in place a lot of the provisions that the Uniform Act already had. And one of the reasons that the bill appears complicated and appears long, and it has a lot of italicized words that go on, is that what most of the bill is about is reorganizing the code and taking election provisions that are in different places in the code and putting them all in Title 24, a new proposed 24.2. And I want to thank Mr. Braun, who did yeoman's work doing that. And if the panel has any questions about exactly sort of what was there before and what was there and what's new, I'm sure he'll help me answer those questions. But the reason the bill is so simple is, despite its length, the only actual operative change that this proposed bill does appears at lines 136 through 139. It is one sentence. And all it does is say that any elector who refuses to present a ballot or presents an unmarked ballot or presents a ballot marked in violation of the elector's oath, signed and notarized, shall be deemed to vacate the office. So when an elector, this is already the law in Virginia, although it appears, if you want to see it on the very first page at lines 25 through 27, an elector becomes elector. He or she takes an oath I'm going to vote for Susie Johnson, which is what Virginia's electorate directs. Current law in Virginia, despite that oath, has no mechanism for what happens if that elector later changes his or her mind and votes for John Smith. All this bill does is create a situation where if that elector does vote inaccurately or refuses to vote for that matter, they are automatically vacating the seat. It's an instant resignation, and there's already a provision in place for how that person would be replaced. I can tell you that this is not unusual. 30 states have done this on this road to sort of unifying this around the country. Some states have provided actually a civil penalty if an elector, they call them faithless electors. I don't really like the term very much, but some states provide a penalty. Some people, a fine. A couple states actually have a criminal penalty. That's not what this does. There's no penalty. It's just that the person is instantly removed and replaced with someone who will vote as directed by the people of Virginia. Just in closing, Mr. Chairman, I will acknowledge that, thankfully at least, this is a rare and perhaps even unlikely scenario, but the consequences are dramatic. When this has happened in the past, the elections weren't particularly close. We all know that elections can be close. We've experienced, think 2000, right? We've experienced real close electoral elections. So the potential for harm to the democracy potentially caused by these faithless electors is enormous. And it could be decisive in an election. So all this will do is help continue to make this consistent among the states and foreclose any attempt for any individual to try to change a decisive election, or for that matter, any organized party to try to change the outcome of a close election. It's a simple bill. The reality is, again, just to emphasize that point, if you want to see what it actually does other than reorganizing the code, look for, it's literally a 4-line bill starting at the end of line 136. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Right. Questions of the patron, Delegate Williams.
Yes, I'd like to ask the patron, what do you think the constitutionality of the Electoral Count Act of 1887? Do you think it's constitutional or unconstitutional?
Delegate Wren, I don't have an opinion on it.
Williams.
Excuse me, Delegate Williams. I don't have an opinion on it.
Okay, Mr. Chair, follow-up question.
Delegate Williams.
And what do you think about representative democracy government when we send someone who is supposed to represent us but is not bound to any particular position or point to vote?
I think it's terrific. Every legislator faces that issue as he or she is voting as to whether to vote what they believe all of their constituents might want or what their personal conscience might want. We deal with that every day. I'm not sure where the delegate's going with that question, Mr. Chair, but I would point out what is a little different here is these electors, by law, they take an oath to vote as directed by the people of Virginia. And what this does is deal with someone who is either about to or has violated that oath.
Mr. Chair, follow-up question.
Delegate Williams.
There's 2 slates of electors, right? There's 2 sets of electors that have taken that oath. And they are directed by the state to say, we have certified the election and you shall go to Congress and deliver that, correct?
I believe that's how it works, yes.
Okay, follow-up question.
Delegate Williams.
So what if Congress, the folks who are supposed to make and decide who to believe, does not believe that the electors who are told what to do actually were told what to do by the state? And you have 2 sets of electors, just like in 1960 when Richard Nixon tossed out of Hawaii's electors, both slates. So what do you have to do about that?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Williams, as I tried to suggest, the bill is not born of recent controversies. And I really don't want to, I prefer not to have this devolve into a discussion of the 2020 election. Having said that, we all lived through it. Congress's role is ceremonial at that point, to count the electoral votes, not to try to go behind them. And that This bill has nothing to do with that process.
Mr. Chair, follow-up question.
Delegate Williams.
I wasn't talking about the 2020 election. I asked you if, at the beginning, the electoral count of 1887, which discusses which slate of electors is going to be accepted in Congress. So you're telling us that we have to abide to every elector, but in Congress and how the Constitution works, we send representative electors to Congress, and those folks decide how to vote that day, correct? Because otherwise, we just send a letter.
Mr. Chair, Delegate Williams, all this bill does is hold someone who has taken an oath to their oath.
All right, any further questions of Delegate Sullivan at this juncture? All right, anyone in the room wish to speak in favor of the bill?
I think Mr. Needler would
Sure.
like to speak. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep, come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Lane Needler, and I'm honored to be here on this is the 45th General Assembly I've had the honor to work with, and I am very pleased to be here today. I'm here on behalf of the Uniform Law Commission. I'm apparently one of those lawyers that referred to, and I just want to say we fully support the bill, and it does, as he said, just two things. It takes existing portions of the code that are in different parts of the code, puts them in one place. The substantive change, it says that somebody who promised not once, not twice, but 3 times to do something. They told their party when they were selected they would do it and vote for the candidates of that party or group of electors if it's not a party. Then the law itself has required for some time, this is not new, required for some time that they vote the way that their party or group of electors who selected them said. And then third, they take an oath. It seems to me we in Virginia who tout all sorts of honesty ought to say somebody who breaks not 1, but 2, but 3 promises ought to be replaced by somebody who will take the oath and uphold it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir, thank you. Anyone else in favor? Anyone here in opposition? Don't see any questions in the queue. Delegate Sullivan, you like the last word?
I think I've said my piece, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
All right. You've heard the bill, and the committee operates by motion.
Mr. Chair, I move to pass by indefinitely.
Been a motion made and seconded to pass by indefinitely House Bill 1862.
Mr. Chair, speaking to that motion.
Delegate Williams,
I would say
2 minutes on each side.
I would say this is another trust issue. We were talking about people breaking their oath, but this is a representative democracy, and we expect people to vote their conscience. So if they're told, we want you to go do this, but ultimately something else comes up and they want to decide to vote their conscience and vote against that position, then I don't think that they should continue to be bound because we have decided that they are the ones that we trust to go and make the best decision for us.
All right, Delegate Munden King.
Thank you.
Speaking to the motion.
It's unfortunate that this motion will move forward because this is a good, straightforward, common sense bill. And I just really appreciate the way that you've presented this and the way that you've come to us and tried your best to make it, as respectful as possible. But I'm going to say what's not being said is that your conscience does not supersede the law. It does not supersede what you agreed to. And while there are those who want to relitigate that President Biden actually won the election in 2020, we know that it's extremely dangerous to have people flip-flopping, changing their mind when they've agreed not once but twice to do something and made an oath. So this is very simple. It's unfortunate that you won't get the support for this, but I hope you'll continue to bring it back.
All right, there's been a motion made and properly seconded to pass by indefinitely House Bill 1862. Members wishing to vote on the voting board. Clerk will close the roll. House Bill 1862 passed by a vote of 5-3.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Delegate Sullivan. House Bill 2257, Delegate Cordoza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an amendment, and I would ask for that to be moved.
Let's get the, is it amendment or a substitute? Okay, there's an amendment. We'll, let's report, you want to report the amendment and then you can hear it and then we can adopt it.
Mr. Chairman, on line 16, the introduced bill, after of, strike 35,000 and insert 25,000.
Okay, can we get a motion on that amendment?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. All right, the amended bill is before us. Delegate Cordoza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, this is a very simple bill. It simply says that cities and towns that have a ward-based system and under 25,000 population will be exempt from the rule about ward-based systems having different ballots. This was designed for very large cities in like Nova, maybe Virginia Beach, which have an actual problem with this type of thing. And when they considered this, they did not consider small towns who will be overwhelmed, overburdened by this process, and it doesn't help them. These are places that, like I would name Poquoson, who overwhelmingly vote a certain way. They're not disproportionately represented or underrepresented by this. So this is just burdensome for them, and we need to relieve them of this because it wasn't designed for them. It was designed for the larger cities who had a problem. And I would ask movement, and I have questions. I will entertain any questions if possible, if needed.
Okay. All right, Delegate Munden King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for the patron.
Go ahead.
What is the problem we have in Northern Virginia?
This bill was designed to target larger cities that had ward-based systems, but still had at-large candidates. And this is a problem for representation in larger cities because they weren't getting a representation they needed because they had a lot of wards, but then at-large representatives that basically covered large sections that needed to be ward. Each area needed a representative. Smaller towns don't have that problem because they're very small little areas. They can benefit from at-large candidates as well as the ward-based.
Just a follow-up. I just want to say that I hear you. I don't think that's the case in most of Northern Virginia, and I just want to put that on the record.
And I'm not trying to say it was most.
Oh, okay. I gotta represent my people.
Cities.
So
I was just saying certain cities. Give me an example.
Thank you.
Yes.
I think the overall point was that it was perhaps larger localities that asked for the ward-based system.
Yeah.
And you have a situation where you have very small localities who are really unable to put a ward-based system into practical application because if you have a town of 8,000 people and you divide it into 7 wards, you could have 100 people picking a town council member. So yes. I understand what you're getting at. Delegate Taylor.
Could this be, it sounds like this is a local issue for you. Could this be fixed with a charter change?
No, because the law has to be changed. The law won't allow the charters to exempt themselves. So that's why we're creating this exemption for those small towns.
Mr. Chair.
And I think this would fall into that same category as moving the municipal elections to November as well. I mean, a lot of the charters still say today that they can be held in May, but they can't. Delegate Williams.
Delegate Cordoza, have you heard any pushback from any of the smaller localities that about like underrepresentation from one pocket to another of a city? Have you heard anything like that?
I've heard when you say that, you mean like pushback against the bill? Okay, I did from one, which is why I did the substitution, the amendment, I'm sorry, to lower the threshold a little more so they weren't affected. But the other ones were either in favor or had no opinion.
Mr. Chair, Delegate Waxman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank Delegate Cardoza for bringing this to the table. One of the towns that I represent is a town of about 150 people, which makes it kind of difficult to do wards.
Thank you.
Delegate Taylor.
What other localities is this a concern for? I just worry when we have a local issue and we just possibly assume that this is affecting, a widespread area across, throughout Virginia.
Absolutely. Poquoson, Hopewell, Waynesboro. There are a few more, but and you can see those are very spread out. Those are not in any pockets. They're very spread out across the Commonwealth. So it's an issue that affects a lot of smaller towns, regardless of region or area.
And I think as I read the bill, and I was just conferring to make sure that it exempts them to where a locality under 25,000 could opt out of the ward system, but could keep it if they so choose. Mm-hmm. Delegate, I saw Delegate Bloxham. Did you have a question?
No, that was my.
Okay, Delegate Williams.
Yeah, I was also thinking that these particular impacted localities, they're pretty small in actual size as far as geographically. We're not
usually
county size.
No, these are cities and towns, small. Yeah, okay. Very small. Mm-hmm.
All right.
All right. So, is there anyone here in the room who wishes to speak in favor of the bill? Anyone in opposition?
Move to report.
I think Delegate Maldonado, did you have a question?
Just a quick question. Is
okay.
For the patron, is this an exemption from the Virginia Voting Rights Act?
No. I would say no. I'd defer to council, but I don't believe that these sections have anything to do with that.
Mr. Chair, Delegate, no, this would not exempt him from the provisions of or exempt these towns from the provisions of the Virginia Voting Rights Act.
All right.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Sickles.
So further on that point to council, so if there was a town or and this for the patron too, that currently has a ward system and they decide to go all at large, they would not be able to do that if there was a racial or ethnic type of impact under current law. Is that right?
Mr. Chair, Delegate, that's correct. They would have, if someone either complained under the Virginia Voting Rights Act or the Attorney General objected on those grounds, then there would be a case, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a patron a question, even though we have a motion on the floor?
Delegate Sickles.
Can we tell anybody where this is going to happen if we pass this bill? What city or town is going to go from having a ward system to an at-large system?
I can say that Poquoson has asked for it. So this bill was brought by Poquoson and has the favor of our former colleague and the current mayor of Poquoson, Gordon Hessel. And that city would go forward. Hopewell and Waynesboro, as well as others, could, but have not confirmed whether they would or not.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Sickles.
Is there a reason why that you didn't ask for a charter change for Poquoson instead of doing this approach?
I believe, as the Mr. Chair, as they have spoken, it wouldn't. They're not allowed to.
No, we change the charters here. We're allowed to do that.
That's true, Delegate Sickles. But I think, in conferring with council on that earlier, I think that the law that was passed that we were just referencing earlier, that I think was probably targeted at Virginia Beach, supersedes what their charter would allow, even if they did change it.
Mr. Chairman, that wasn't my question, though. I mean, there's two ways to skin a cat here. You could change the charter instead of passing a bill that, I mean, I'm not saying the other one is right or wrong. You could do it the other way. I was just asking him why. Well, he doesn't, I think I know the answer because he doesn't think we can change a charter.
Well,
that's not true.
I would say that you could change the charter, but it would have no effect because the law would still make it have it illegal to enforce the charter. because of this law.
Mr. Chairman. Delegate Sickles, normally you're correct that you could change the charter to supersede existing state law. However, in the current state of the law of 24.2-222, on line 15, you'll see it says, notwithstanding any other provision of law, general or special. And when we use that phrase, the special is referring to any charter. So it means notwithstanding any charter, this prohibition stands. So if you change the charter, it wouldn't be effective in this case.
All right, thank you.
All right, there's been a motion made and properly seconded to recommend for reporting House Bill 2257. Members wishing to vote, vote on the voting board. Clerk will close the roll. House Bill 2257 recommended for reporting by a vote of 5-3.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you,
Members of the
Delegate.
committee.
House Bill 2286, Delegate Van Valkenburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'll be brief. This is a contribution limits bill that sets contribution limits. I can go through all the details of them if you'd like, but it sets contribution limits for gubernatorial campaigns, state senate campaigns, and House delegates and local office campaigns, as well as what political action committees can do, and it indexes them to inflation. And really, this comes down to, the reason I put this bill in is this comes down to a kind of philosophy, which is that I think one of the reasons why voters have a mistrust in democracy is that they don't like our current campaign finance system. And one of the reasons they don't like it is because they think some people have outsized influence. There's the appearance of corruption. And so this bill just puts contribution limits in place so that one person can't donate or one group can't donate over the limits put in this bill. The reasons for the limits in this bill, I do think the federal limits are too low. This, I think, sets reasonable limits, but I will toss it back to you guys.
All right. Any questions of Delegate Van Valkenburg? Delegate Waxman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was curious as to how you came up with different limits for the Senate and the House, since the House runs every 2 years and the Senate every 4.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I would just say because the Senate races have more territory and are typically more expensive races. What's the rationale?
Just, I'm just looking at, but the House runs twice as often.
All right. Is there anyone in the room who wishes to speak in favor of the bill? Anyone in here in opposition? All right. We will move online, and I think we're in the same order as the prior bills. Nancy Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yep, I guess we're all here because we care about campaign finance. And if you don't know it, our elections are under national scrutiny because cost is so high. And I think Virginians are fed up. And I just think you have to look at VPAP or the Department of Elections showing that contributions of $100,000, $200,000, even $500,000 before a primary have been coming from Democrats and Republicans. And it's eroding our confidence in our legislators. It's interesting. I give up to maybe $200. And when you look at an Open Secrets analysis, they're a good governance group. They looked at Virginia elections, and only 10% of the cost of our elections are from people giving less than $200. 2/3 of our election funding comes from people giving $50,000. I don't know who they are, but anyway, it's just as you know, and the cost of our elections are running into the millions of dollars, and you guys only make $20,000 a year. So our concern is we have an opportunity to stop this money arms war. We think it's time, and we hope that you vote for the bill. But given our track record of 5-3 votes against the bill, we don't think it's going to happen this time. You killed 6 bills this year. Last year you had 13 bills. There was a subcommittee on campaign finance that was supposed to re-examine this issue and declined to do so. But at the end of the day, Virginians care about this issue. We've done surveys, and 4 out of 5 Virginians feel that this is important to do. There are 5 bills that will be coming over from the Senate. We really hope that at least a couple of them get out of your committee. So thank you very much, and we hope that you vote for this bill, but I don't think so. Bye.
Thank you. Jessica Mott.
The lack of current dollar limits has marginalized my voice and the voices of other small donors and voters. Large donations increase wasteful expenditures and perceptions of conflicts of interest. And I urge you to support the bill and address the wishes of 78% of Virginians who support reducing money from big campaign donors. Thanks.
Thank you. Bill Millhauser.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to comment on this bill. I agree with the previous comments. I'm very concerned about the outsized influence of large donations on our elections. The vast majority of donations are made by large donors. As Ms. Morgan pointed out, we have donations of 100, 200,000, 500,000 in primary elections. This is completely out of whack. And the voices of small donors are completely wiped out by these large donations. And I urge you to take this issue very seriously and consider this bill. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
And last in the queue, Pamela Berg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. The League of Women Voters of Virginia supports HB 2286. Our support is grounded in the fact that Virginia currently is one of only 5 states that have no limits on campaign contributions. In our written statement, we provide details on VPAP data indicating that campaign financing of Virginia state legislative candidates is dominated by contributions from businesses and large dollar donors, and only a small proportion of campaign funding comes from future constituents of a candidate. Additionally, the U.S. Supreme Court has stated that contribution limits remain legal, and recent academic analysis described in our written statement show that limiting candidate campaign contributions has only minimal effects on the relative level of independent spending. The League supports HB 2286. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions from committee members? Delegate Taylor.
I'd just like to make a comment. If the voice of low dollar donors are not being heard because there's high dollar donors, that's on the candidate, and they have to answer for not listening to their constituents or their donors or their supporters, whatever it may be.
Delegate.
Somebody else can I respond to that?
Sure.
Yeah, I guess I would just say that, that would suggest that every politician would have to tilt at windmills if they wanted to try to win elections, but they couldn't get you do have to have money to run a race, and you do have to play within the system that exists in order to achieve the goals that you want to achieve, right? Which is getting elected, but hopefully then you're getting elected in order to institute policies that you achieve, right? And you have to work within that system. And I think when you're looking at things like campaign finance, systems matter, right? And systems matter for people's voices who can run for office and all those things. And so I guess I would just respond and say, I think at the end of the day, structures matter, right? Rules matter. One of the reasons why I think the General Assembly works more effectively than Congress is we have better rules, right? And those rules facilitate bipartisanship where possible, facilitates making progress on things like budgets that they can up there, right? And I think that's because we have better rules in place. And what we see in Congress, where we just say, hey, it's up to you as individuals, is we see folks maybe not acting in the public interest, right? And so I think rules and structures matter. And I think on the campaign side, one of the big things that's holding us back, I certainly don't think it's the only thing. I also am a big believer in ranked choice voting, which I know is not going to go anywhere, but I think also facilitates better processes. But I think this is one of those things. And so I guess that would just be my response.
Delegate Bloxham.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does this address what I see as a problem as group funding through the internet at all?
Say that. I'm sorry. Say that.
Well, it's how the money that was raised against me in a race was on the internet, and you could donate to it, and then they divvy it up, and so the candidate raised a load of money from out of state, and every individual person gave like $6.42, and it was, I'm like going, how did they do that? And it was a website group funding.
Mr. Chair, I would say I think the answer is it depends. I think if what I hear correct, I think what you're saying is a group facilitated individual donations, right? So if there's some pop-up group that says, hey, everybody, you should donate to candidate X, right? And then they act as a kind of portal to go donate to X. The answer would be no, because they would be donating as an individual. Whereas if the individuals were donating to a group, right, and then the group was giving that funds, it would apply. Does that?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I guess my explanation, that's an area that from out of state, you give $100 to X, and then the X says, you're my candidate, or these 6 are my candidates, then they split the money up. To me, that's much more unnerving than a corporation that's in Virginia giving money to candidates. I'm just saying, I was trying to figure out if that was in here anywhere. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Munden King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Speaking to the bill. Thank you so much for bringing this forward. As someone who has run 4 races in 1 year, I think the cost of running in Virginia has just become a whole system of mail and digital, and it's extremely expensive. And what has happened is that this creates a barrier for working class folks to run for office, for people who aren't extremely independently wealthy to run. And so while, I have some apprehension that this does not include limits for individuals, I think this is such a step in the right direction towards us completely overhauling a system that's become too expensive to really have representative democracy. I mean, if you look at the record, 61% of us own more than $100,000 in stock. 57% of us own multiple homes. That's not the reality for a lot of Virginians, and a lot of those voices are missing here simply because our system has become too expensive to run.
And just clarification real quick, Mr. Chair. It does limit how much individuals can give to you. I think, do you mean how much an individual can spend on their own race?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's a Supreme Court problem.
Yes. Thank you.
All right. Any further questions? Anything you'd like to add, Delegate?
No, I think it's all been said.
All right. Committee operates by motion. And a motion. Delegate Taylor.
Second.
Motion made, properly seconded to lay House Bill 2286 on the table. Members wishing to vote on the voting board. Clerk will close the roll. House Bill 2286 laid on the table by a vote of 5-3.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
Thank you, Delegate. All right, the last 2 bills are committee members, and I will say we're running up on our time limit here. I know other committees start now or very soon. So House Bill 2289, Delegate Williams.
Yes, good morning. I have a very complicated bill. This one's not going to be simple. Everybody get ready. This works on the recall process. It's a Boyd Graves bill. And as somebody who's done both referendums and worked on recalls, I've read through this and I support it, but I do have somebody who was actually on the committee and chaired the committee that put this together, and I'd prefer to yield my time to her.
Okay, come on up.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, committee members. I'm Pia Trigiani. I'm a member of the Boyd Graves Conference and chaired the study group that looked at this issue of removal. It's not recall, it is removal. Virginia's law, and we're one of 30 states, there are 30 states that have a recall procedure. Virginia does not. The removal procedure has been on the books in Virginia since 1874, and there have been a number of court cases. The Boyd Graves Conference, it does not normally appear in this committee. We're usually over in courts. But it's a group of about 100 or so lawyers that sit around and talk about the law, kind of like the Uniform Commission on State Laws, but it's representative of civil lawyers, lawyers who practice on the civil side, litigators. You're invited to be a member. You have to show that you're going to work on improvement of the law, and that's the goal here and what this committee did. Our committee was Study groups are designated by Boyd Graves Conference to study particular issues. This study group, 5 lawyers, 6 lawyers, 2 of whom were judges who had handled cases under the removal statute. So when Boyd Graves looks at a bill, it's to improve process, procedure, and add clarity to the law. It is not and doesn't have anything to do with a perspective, a political perspective at all. It's designed to be purist and really to try and help, again, improve the law. This bill is, again, to the removal statutes in 24 and recommends 2 things, a substantive change and then a number of procedural changes to clean up the process, to expedite the process for removal. On the substantive side, the proposal seeks to codify a case, the Warren case, which is a 1920s case in Virginia that established the standard for removal. Again, not making it a policy issue, but a failure to perform in office. It is to avoid any suggestion that there's any policy reason for removing someone. The removal statutes have been used to some extent as a political weapon, and they shouldn't be. It is to, again, that's for recall, and Virginia doesn't have it. So this is to focus on the standard for removal, and the standard in the Warren case was a failure to perform clear ministerial duties of office. The procedural changes are several. To provide that the State Board of Elections prescribe a form for the petition. These petitions come in from citizens. They're not always follow forms. They're not always clear. Don't follow the statute. So why not give them a form to work with? So the form. To establish clear requirements for supporting documentation to be provided with the petition. To define the duties of the registrar in reviewing and processing the petition. There's a lot of litigation over the issue of whether or not the petition was properly presented and whether all that was needed to support the petition was provided. To clarify the role and duties of the Commonwealth's attorney. These cases are brought by the Commonwealth's attorneys because they go before the court to decide whether someone should be removed from office. And I will tell you it's very challenging to get Commonwealth's attorneys to participate in the process, so adding clarity to their duties is very important. The bill also clarifies that the circuit court cannot dismiss a petition solely for an error or omission in the form of the petition if that is not material and can be corrected. It codifies the ruling in another Virginia Supreme Court case to clarify that an official is removable only on clear and convincing evidence. So that's a higher standard for removal, not the lowest standard, but the highest standard under the law. And to automatically suspend an officer who pleads guilty or nolo contendere to a felony or is found guilty of a felony. There was a case in Norfolk several years ago, more recently, dealing with the treasurer that involved a question about removal, and there was a criminal violation. So this clarifies and makes clear that if you're convicted of a criminal crime or you plead nolo contendere, you would be removed. I would just, again, I'm glad to answer any questions. This is not my practice area. Delegate Sickles can tell you I'm a condo lawyer. So I don't do this all the time, but I can tell you that in working on this process from the lawyers who did have a lot of experience in this area, they had litigated the cases, they knew what the issues were, and the changes are simple and elegant and I think effective. Thank you. Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you. And if I could retake my time in a second. One of the things, I didn't know what the word ministerial meant in this context, so the height of its use was in the 1830s, and it means an act performed in prescribed manner and in obedience to a legal authority without regards to one's judgment or discretion. So I thought that was good that we're not holding office holders accountable for exercise of judgment or discretion. It's only when there's clear abuse, neglect of or incompetence in those specifically stated duties of that office. I'll second that there's been issues with petitions, especially whether or not signatures have to be notarized, or whether or not all the signatures on one page can be notarized. There's been issues with the forms being wrong. I like that the registrar is able to recommend these are the changes where they are not completely proper before you put it in front of the circuit court. There is the Commonwealth's attorney is the one who is actually making the decision that this can go forward. There's a provision that says if the Commonwealth's attorney is the one that is being questioned, then a special prosecutor would be the one that would handle it. I will note for the elected officials in the room that this does not include legislators, judges, or members of the executive branch, because as pointed out, this has to be a constitutional change. And then finally, I felt like it was the material adverse effect upon the conduct of the office. That would be important because it actually has to impact not just, oh, you forgot to do this. It actually has to have that good cause shown. I would also state that this does not come from me in any particular reason or background. I'm supportive of the Boyd Grades Initiative, and this is not targeted or directed to anybody in particular.
All right. Are there any questions from committee members? Delegate Maldonado.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for the patron. Two questions, actually. I appreciate what is the intention of this bill, and I think all the bills we've heard today have some really great elements of them. For this one, two things. One thing I'm noticing, lines 92 to 95 give really broad discretion to the Commonwealth attorneys. And I'm just wondering if in that subsection, if we need to have a reference to limit those powers so that it is clear, like the other provisions that specifically reference 24.2-233, so those powers are not so broad and unbounded. And I can pause there, and maybe that's for the attorney.
Well, if I may. So you said lines 92 through 95, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, section C. So as I understand it, it would just be the citizens petitioning would hand it to the Commonwealth's attorney. And I said it was much like a magistrate determining if there's a prima facie case to go forward. As my expert witness said, the Commonwealth's attorney is the one that actually has to prosecute the case, so it feels like you're presenting the case to the Commonwealth, and if they feel like it's good enough, then they can move forward. I was a little bit concerned about giving everybody, like one person, all the decision-making power, and there being no sort of appeal process. But this has been shot by a lot of lawyers that are smarter than me, so I'm presenting it, but I certainly understand that concern. And if that is something that even can be shopped more, I'm open to it.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'm sure lawyers smarter than I am, I've also worked on this. So, but I think that would help put parameters, because there are other places in here where we're very clear and reference that code section. So if that would be a friendly amendment, I would suggest that.
Would you like to?
Well, I have another
tackle
question.
that now?
Sorry.
Or do you want to do your question?
My second question,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, go ahead.
So the other question is, sort of looking at these broad powers, there's also, what if it's a Commonwealth attorney that is the subject of the recall effort, right?
So it's near the end, I believe, and it does say that if it is a Commonwealth's attorney, then the Commonwealth's attorney, a special prosecutor, will be appointed. And I'm sure that special prosecutor is appointed by the circuit court judge in that case, and then you would present everything to a special prosecutor who could bring the case forward.
And this would not apply to constitutional officers?
That would need a constitutional change, is my understanding, which I found enlightening and wasn't aware of. This applies to constitutional officers. I'm sorry. It's the legislators, judges, members of the executive branch that
It does not.
It does not apply to because of the Constitution.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So I'm aware that there is some movement on the Senate side with their companion bill. So my position is we could do an amendment, or you can wait and go to conference.
Is it being tweaked at all? Somebody's following on the Senate side.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Eric Lincoln on behalf of the Virginia Bar Association. Although I try not to comment about the other body in committee, My understanding is that there is a similar bill that was carried by another patron, and they are still reconciling between those two bills, so I don't know what's happening.
But I think your point was reconciling conference, and I'm certainly open to making it work right.
Mr. Chairman.
So, okay, so I think the amendments that the Senate have they actually adopted those?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, the Senate has adopted 2 amendments to this bill in committee and then reported that to the floor of the Senate.
Do they specifically address the issue that Delegate Maldonado raised?
Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Okay.
I'd love to see the amendments, but I'm open to friendly amendments that fix some of those issues for sure.
Okay, so this bill will come to,
Amendments?
well, I don't think there's a way to actually get them in front of everybody for everybody to consider. So what if we do it this way? Obviously, the subcommittee operates by motion, and whatever you all want to do is fine. If you don't want the bill to move forward, that's one thing. If you do want the bill to move forward, but feel like that issue specifically needs to be addressed, then council can share what the Senate has done, those amendments, with committee members. And then when we get to, if you want to recommend for reporting, we can bring it to full on Friday. And then when this bill comes up in the subcommittee report, then everyone will have had a chance to see those amendments. And then we can either decide that we're going to adopt them or not adopt them, or whatever the full committee decides to do with the bill. But at that point, then we would have all the information. We wouldn't have to do I saw a lot of lines of text there. Wouldn't have to do those on the fly here. And everybody have a chance to look at it and get on the same page.
Yeah, the spirit of the amendment might be what the courts committee would call it.
Okay. All right. Are there any further questions at this moment? Does anyone in the room wish to speak in favor of the bill? I guess it's implied that the Boyd Graves Conference is in support.
Yes. Okay. The Bar Association as well.
All right, and the Bar Association. Anyone here in opposition? Okay, so
the proper motion, Mr. Chairman, be to move to report with the spirit of the amendment.
We've done that.
I don't know that that's a formal motion, but I think we've all agreed that that's how we're going to approach this. If the subcommittee does want to report it.
Second.
Okay, there's been a motion made and properly seconded to recommend for reporting. Pending further discussion, House Bill 2289. Members wishing to vote on the voting board. All right, House Bill, clerk will close the roll. House Bill 2289 is recommended for reporting by a vote of 7-0 with 1 abstention. All right, the last bill on our docket, House Bill 2443, Delegate Bloxham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I present from here?
You can.
All right, this bill came to me from our local last election. In the past, we have always used in local town elections the next man up, and I say that meaning a lot of write-in votes are done. These towns are down to about 200 people, so it's more like probably some of your high school classes were bigger than some of these town elections. So what happens is you don't have enough people to fill the town offices. You have a lot of write-in votes. And what has happened in the past, you call up John and say, John, you won, you're the mayor. And John says, not on your life. I'm not doing it. So what we've done in the past, historically, is always said, okay, John didn't win. Mary, you're the second person up, so now do you want to be mayor? And they're like, okay, I'll do it. Well, we have found in the last election that we've been doing it wrong for some 30 years. And the way that it is supposed to do by law, and Susan can correct me, that office, if I say I'm not going to do it, I vacate it. And that would in turn mean you'd have to run another town election. And that would, of course, be problematic. You're having trouble filling seats anyway. And like I say, these are small towns. I've limited it to 4,000 and less. That captures, I've got 17 towns on the Eastern Shore, incorporated towns. So, and most of them are 2,000 people or below. So that's the reason the bill's brought forward. I'm trying to make what was practice in the past legal, is all I'm trying to do. And that's the crux of the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Are there any questions of Delegate Bloxham? Is there anyone here who wishes to speak in favor? Anyone in opposition? All right, there's been a motion made properly seconded to recommend for reporting House Bill 2443. Members wishing to vote, please vote on the voting board. Clerk will close the roll. House Bill 2443 recommended for reporting 8-0. I think that is the last bill on the docket. So being no further business, committee will rise.